In tonight's news edition, His Majesty the King begins a visit to Mexico for talks on regional and bilateral issues ahead of a summit with President Obama. The Prime Minister says the government will bring new legislation to Parliament in a crackdown on violations against water networks. And Israel destroys more Palestinian homes in occupied Jerusalem while it presses ahead with construction of hundreds of new settler homes. Good evening and welcome to the news at 10. His Majesty the King began an official visit to Mexico for talks with Mexican President Enrique Peña Nieto on Jordanian-Mexican ties and regional and international issues. During his stay in Mexico City, the King will also hold a series of meetings with senior political and economic leaders. The visit at the invitation of President Nieto aims to boost Jordan's relations with Mexico and Latin American nations and promote the kingdom as an investment and tourism destination and gateway for Latin Americans to the Middle East. King Abdullah will also travel to the United States for a summit with President Barack Obama. The talks in California will focus on the historic friendship and partnership between Jordan and the U.S. and ways to cement cooperation and boost efforts of the two countries' leaders to push for Middle East peace and prosperity. King Abdullah and Obama will also consult and coordinate on regional developments, especially the Palestinian-Israeli peace talks and the Syrian crisis. During his trip to the United States, His Majesty will meet key administration officials and congressional leaders, as well as representatives of American, Islamic, and Jewish organizations. Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour said the government will present an amended draft legislation to replace the 2014 Water Authority law. He said the aim is to end corruption in the water and agricultural sector, stop violations of water networks, and curb the digging of illegal water wells. Mansour also told the lower house the government had shut down hundreds of illegal water wells and is currently working to end thefts and other breaches against the water networks. He expressed hope that the House will soon pass the amended draft law. In an address to the White House yesterday, Mansour said Jordan is not being kept in the dark about developments in the U.S.-brokered Palestinian-Israeli peace talks. He said Jordan is a key player in the efforts to ensure a fair agreement is reached. The Prime Minister said Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas provided assurances that the kingdom will be kept informed of the progress in the talks and any decisions that will be taken ahead of time. He was addressing queries raised by lawmakers about U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry's peace proposals. Mansour said Jordan is waiting for feedback from the Palestinian negotiators over the talks on final status issues such as Jerusalem, borders, and the Palestinian refugees' rights to return, which are part of the kingdom's higher interests. Also in our home news, Her Majesty Queen Rania met with the Mark a Difference youth volunteers from the campaign launched by the UN Resident Coordinator's Office to promote the My World survey in Jordan. My World is a global survey that aims to allow people across the world to relate to the United Nations and especially the Secretary General the issues they deem as most important and would like the post-2015 agenda to address. As a member of the UN Secretary General's high-level panel formed to advise on the global development agenda beyond 2015, Queen Rania asserted the important role the youth played in promoting the survey across the kingdom. The Queen also explained the survey helps collect feedback from all social groups. She added it is crucial to publish the results of the survey so that they may benefit decision-makers and stakeholders. Iraqi forces are besieging and shelling the city of Fallujah in the northwestern Anbar region. Troops are poised to launch a possible ground assault to drive out anti-government fighters, including militants of the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant. The military action has halted exports of crude oil from Iraq to Jordan, which used to be trucked across the border through Anbar. However, Prime Minister Noor al-Maliki said local authorities and tribal leaders in the Anbar would unveil a joint initiative to end the standoff in the coming days. In Baghdad, a series of bomb blasts left more than 30 people dead. We get more in this report.
The deadly violence intensifies across Iraq as government forces prepare to launch an offensive against militants in the northwestern Anbar province. A spate of bombings rocked Baghdad, killing at least 34 people. Several of them occurred near the heavily fortified Green Zone and a busy square in the center of the capital. Security sources said two car bombs went off opposite the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, killing 11. The Interior Ministry blamed what it called the cowardly attack on a suicide bomber on a motorcycle. In a separate incident, a suicide bomber driving a car detonated himself outside a restaurant close to a checkpoint 1 street away from the Green Zone, killing 8 people. An explosion near Kulani Square in central Baghdad left 4 more people dead, and later in the day, 3 car bombs blew up in quick successions in the southeastern Jisr Diyala district, killing a further 11. The explosions came a day after 2 rockets were fired into the Green Zone, home to the Prime Minister's office and Western embassies, and are likely to heighten concerns about Iraq's ability to protect strategic sites as security deteriorates. No group immediately claimed responsibility for the bombings, but militants have been regaining ground in Iraq, particularly in Anbar region, where they overran 2 cities last month. More than 1,000 people were killed in violence across the country in January alone. UN envoy to Iraq, Nikolai Mladinov, said in a statement that the Iraqi political leaders should show national unity in dealing with such threats and unite against terrorism. Farah Ajlouni for the News at 10.
British Prime Minister David Cameron said he was worried that Syria's efforts to destroy and hand over its chemical weapons arsenal were behind schedule. Cameron said London planned to pressure Damascus to get the program back on track. Syria missed a deadline to hand over all the toxic materials it declared, putting the program several weeks behind and jeopardizing a final June 30th deadline.
Very promising start, with chemicals not only being discovered and removed but also destroyed. There do seem to be now indications that the programme is slowing and that not all the information necessary is forthcoming. I discussed this issue in a telephone call with President Putin some 48 hours ago. Britain will continue to put pressure on all parties to make sure the chemical weapons are produced and destroyed.
In Syria, fighting raged in Aleppo, where rebels targeted government forces around the northern city's international airport. Opposition activists said the Syrian Air Force is attacking Aleppo with barrel bombs, forcing many to flee. The use of barrel bombs, oil drums, or cylinder packed with explosives and metal fragments dropped from helicopters was condemned by Syria's opposition and its Western backers at last month's peace talks in Switzerland. The latest videos also showed explosive barrels falling on the Damascus suburb of Daraya. Israel demolished a Palestinian house in occupied East Jerusalem under the pretext it was built without a permit. Home demolition and settlement expansions are part of an Israeli campaign to Judaize the occupied eastern parts of the city. This report has more.
This is the house of newlywed Khalid al-Bashir, a Palestinian resident of the Arab East Jerusalem neighborhood of Jabal al-Mukabbar. Israel's municipal authority in the occupied city has ruled it was built without a permit and, upon what it called a court order, brought in an excavator to tear it down. Relatives said Bashir and his wife moved into the house 3 months ago. His father Muhammad said he has been paying 550 shekels in monthly installments against an 80,000 shekel fine he was charged by Israel's Jerusalem municipality for building the house without a permit. Palestinians contend construction permits are rarely issued and often forego the process. The demolition touched off protests by Palestinians who threw stones and other objects at Israeli troops. Soldiers respond with tear gas and stun grenades. An Israeli military spokesman said 3 Palestinians were detained. Hundreds of Arab homes have been destroyed in an ongoing, systematic Judaization scheme in the occupied city.
Israel is now destroying the houses of the original Palestinians residing in their houses in East Jerusalem and in historic Palestine, while also building illegitimate and illegal settlements and stealing lands and imposing facts on the ground. And all of this is aimed at the cleansing of Palestine of its residents and to bring settlers in an illegitimate and illegal manner, and the ultimate Judaization of Jerusalem.
While demolishing Palestinian homes, Israel gave the go-ahead for construction of new ones for Jewish settlers on occupied land. The Israeli municipality of Jerusalem approved building plans for 558 new Jewish homes in the West Bank. A municipality spokeswoman said the local planning committee had approved requests by private contractors for the construction work in the settlements of Har Homa in Jebel Abu Ghneim, Nevi Yaakov, and Bisgat Zayev. The three settlements are in a part of the West Bank that Israel annexed to Jerusalem in a move that has not been recognized internationally. The Palestinians say settlement expansion could derail the US-sponsored peace talks that resumed in July after a 3-year break.
We are saying to the world that it needs to take responsibility regarding these violations and this dangerous escalation, and it must question and legally prosecute Israel, putting a stop to these violations, because it's clear that it is intentionally destroying the chances of peace and goes against international law and the international community as a whole.
3 weeks ago, Israel published tenders for 1,300 new homes in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Hala Dababne for the News at 10.
The trial of former Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi has adjourned until next month. The former Islamist leader is accused of inciting the killing of about a dozen protesters outside the presidential palace during unrest in late 2012. Morsi was deposed by the army in July. He has 4 separate sets of charges brought against him since his ousting. The trial was adjourned after the court assigned a lawyer to defend Morsi. The lawyer told reporters that 3 witnesses' testimonies scheduled to be heard today were also postponed. Egypt is pushing ahead with an army-backed plan for political transition, with presidential and parliamentary elections due to take place within months. Field Marshal Abdel Fattah al-Sisi is widely expected to announce his presidential bid and win easily. Libya destroyed the last known large stockpile of chemical weapons from the era of Muammar Gaddafi. U.S., Canadian, and German experts helped in the destruction at a remote site in southern Libya. This report has the details.
Libyan officials and international diplomats monitored the destruction of chemical weapons at a facility in southern Libya. These were amongst the last chemical weapons in the country's arsenal that were destroyed this week, finally bringing to an end a program that started about 10 years ago. Libya began dismantling its poison gas program in 2004, but the operation stopped during the NATO-backed uprising against Muammar Gaddafi in 2011. Western officials had been concerned that the weapons would be discovered by Islamist militias as the country struggles with disorder in the years after the uprising. Officials later praised the international cooperation of the project.
Today, we visited the chemical weapons destruction facility at Ruwaha. There we saw firsthand how international cooperation has successfully overcome the considerable challenges of destroying chemical weapons at this very remote location.
Officials said 507 shells filled with mustard gas were destroyed and that there were no other known batches of chemical weapons left.
European Union Foreign Policy Chief Catherine Ashton urged Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych to sort out violence on the streets. She also called for efforts across the political spectrum to pursue dialogue to move Ukraine out of crisis. After meeting opposition leaders and Yanukovych separately in Kiev, Ashton said the EU was ready to help Ukraine in many ways, both financially and with expertise. She said she believed a Ukrainian-led process of compromise and reform was possible, but she was frustrated at the lack of real compromise between the authorities and the opposition.
Sense of violence decreasing, there's still great concern about the situation on the ground, and great concern to see that those who have committed violence are brought to justice. And a great desire to see some kind of transparent and independent process to achieve that. I've made clear that we are more than willing to help and support such a process, which I do think is extremely important.
North and South Korea agreed to allow some families separated by the 1950-53 Korean War to hold brief reunions. The agreement came despite a campaign by Pyongyang that Seoul cancel planned war games with the United States. A meeting of officials from both Koreas agreed the reunion will take place on February 20th to the 25th in a location north of the border. Officially, Seoul has not linked the reunion with its demands for the cancellation of the annual military exercises by the U.S. and South Korean militaries scheduled to begin this month. But officials in the South say the intention is clear and that Seoul will not fall in line. More than 70,000 South Koreans have been seeking to meet lost family members at family reunions. Japan kicked off its 65th Sapporo Snow Festival in its yearly display of ice sculpting skills with over 200 sculptures on display. Everyone from private groups to the Japanese self-defense forces took part in creating the sculptures, many of them in very fine detail. With the festival starting only days before Sochi Olympics, this year the sculptures had a definite Olympic theme with giant models of the various sports. The festival saw 2.3 million people last year, despite the -12 degrees Celsius weather conditions. And we start with NBA action. Kevin Love scored 31 points and pulled down 17 rebounds to lead the Minnesota Timberwolves over the injury-plagued Los Angeles Lakers 109-99. Kevin Martin tied a season high with 32 points for the Wolves, who snapped a 2-game losing streak and beat the Lakers in Minneapolis for the first time in 7 years. The Lakers lost their 7th straight game despite guards Steve Nash and Steve Blake's return from injury.
Blake throws it off the rim. Outlet from Love, and this should finish it. Oh, Corey Brewer misses the stuff. Out of bounds.
The Olympic flame kept burning as it arrived in Sochi, the host of the 2014 Winter Olympics. To the cheering of the crowds, the torchbearer arrived on stage and used the opportunity to preserve the sacred flame. Fans also took photos with the official Sochi 2014 Olympic mascots, the polar bear, the hare, and the leopard. The 40,000-mile Olympic torch relay is the longest journey in the history of the game, taking it to the North Pole, Europe's highest mountain, and even unlit into space. The 2014 Winter Olympics officially starts on Friday with Sochi's opening ceremony. And finally, cold tonight with southeasterly light to moderate winds. Frost formation is expected after midnight and in the early morning hours in most regions. More of the cold weather will continue tomorrow across the country while remaining fair in the Jordan Valley. Winds will be southeasterly moderate with a chance for light showers. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect a relatively chilly night and warm tomorrow with northerly winds and slightly choppy seas. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. To end the news, here's a reminder of our top stories. His Majesty the King begins a visit to Mexico for talks on regional and bilateral issues ahead of a summit with President Obama. The Prime Minister says the government will bring new legislation to Parliament in a crackdown on violations against water networks. And Israel destroys more Palestinian homes in occupied Jerusalem while it presses ahead with construction of hundreds of new settler homes. that, we come to the end of tonight's news. I'm Nancy Khair. Thank you for watching. Have a good night.